Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here at the Grand Papua Hotel in Mosby for the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development 6th Annual Learning Workshop. So this session today, this afternoon, we are in the skills workshop session, and I will be moderating this afternoon session. My name is Gloria Nema. I'm the program officer with the Pacific Women team. On our panel this afternoon, we have two people here with us today, this afternoon. Ms. Yvonne Kennedy from the Business Coalition for Women, and we were expecting Mr. Emmanuel Ginis from the Department of Personal Management, but he is not here with us today. So it's just going to be Evonne this afternoon. I will give a brief introduction on Ms. Kennedy. So Ms. Yvonne Kennedy is the Executive Director of the Business Coalition for Women. She has a community development and project coordination experience in Papua New Guinea and Australia. She has an MBA from the Australian Institute of Business, a bachelor's degree in social work, and a diploma in accounting. She has always supported development work and has a passion and commitment to the development of her people here in Papua New Guinea. And that's her bio on the screen. Mr. Emmanuel Ginis leads the PNG government's push for greater equality for all Papua New Guineans as the Gender Equity and Social Inclusion Manager at the Department of Personal Management. Unfortunately, we do not have with us today Mr. Ginis, but we have Ms. Yvonne Kennedy here. So I will hand over the mic to Ms. Kennedy, who will talk a bit about gender equality and social inclusion policy that we have, that the government of Papua New Guinea has today.
Thanks, Gloria. I might start by just acknowledging the private sector's work and why companies are getting serious about gender diversity, and then I'm going to explain how the private sector and also public sector can achieve this. And then more specifically, I wanted to talk about the work of our organisation, the Business Coalition for Women, and how we're actively trying to do that on the ground. And hopefully have some, leaving insights and takeaway questions for you, but I'd be interested to also hear what questions you might have as well. So why are companies getting in the game of diversity and actually are being really serious about it? And it's well documented, the research is out. We have the McKinsey report, we have the Harvard review that shows that if we encourage gender diversity at all levels of the organisation, that those organisations who do that will have greater financial returns than others in the sector. They will encourage different perspectives, which often lead to greater creativity and helping companies innovate more. Diverse teams are more likely to have some common experiences with their end user. So that creates better products for customers. So what I mean by that is if we have both men and women helping to design and develop products and services for the customer is usually made up of both men and women. And so this helps that business to create greater advantage over other companies. So how do we achieve this? We definitely need leadership commitment. It can't be just something that human resources does. It can't be just certain people in the organisation who drive this. Senior leadership needs to have that commitment, and it has to be a whole of systems approach. So we need to make it integrated into strategy. So what I mean by that is that we have to have an overarching commitment to it. And yes, the public sector has the GESI, so Gender Equity, Social Inclusion, but it needs to be integrated. So how do you make sure that that is actually being implemented at every level of the organisation? So ways that they can do that is to make sure that it becomes part of the norms and the culture of that organisation. So ongoing communication in their organisation, whether it's through internal newsletters, through emails, making sure that work sites are safe zones for both men and women, making sure that leaders are publicly stating that commitment, setting targets to achieve that as well, not just offering lip service. So what we know is that an organisation, to make it part of their whole structure, they need to have mentorship within that organisation. They need to make sure that their recruitment and retention is transparent, because often those processes can be biased, and so they need to have recruitment processes that are transparent. They need to have talent development opportunities for both men and women. Set targets. It's so important for us to understand, where do we want to go? You know, is it a case of just having 50% women and 50% men? Well, actually, no. We want to make sure that the women who are in those organisations are impacting, are having, you know, impactful conversations and actions in those organisations, and not just having lip service. So that last point about norms and culture is really interesting. So we can have as many policies and strategies as we want in an organisation, but if the organisational culture doesn't support it, it won't succeed. And the Harvard Business Review showed this. So data suggests that for diversity to work, workers have to buy into the value of diversity, not just hear some rules about it. They also revealed that a country's diversity norms, such as gender roles and attitudes, also impacts the success born in a company through gender diversity. So what does that mean for us? So for a country where we know that mostly men are in leadership positions, we have no women in parliament, we do know that there are very strong gender roles in our society. What that is saying, that if we don't work at that level around our norms and our culture, you'll see very little impact in organisations as well. So we need to keep pushing that agenda, and so that's why you'll see leaders in the private sector, such as the CEO of BSP, Robin Fleming. You'll see Rupert Bray from Steamships, and other leaders speaking out about things that might impact on women's progress, such as violence. So they talk about it in their organisations, they implement policies, but they also talk out in the community. And that's because they recognise that if we do not change cultural norms and practices, we'll have very little change around gender diversity in the workplace or in the public sector also. So in terms of our organisation, the Business Coalition for Women, we are a coalition of businesses. So currently we have 58 members, and we were formed by the business community to try and change that practice around gender diversity. There's certainly some things that the business community are doing very well, but there are gaps. And so they created our organisation to assist them with some of those barriers. So the first area we work around is addressing violence, because we recognise that if you do not address safety, you will not see women retained in the workplace, and you certainly won't see women promoted into leadership positions. So we work around the family and sexual violence policy. We help companies implement that. We also do that with an anti-sexual harassment policy, and we do training to also help them implement that policy. And we work with companies for about a year to help with that implementation. And why I talked about those norms and practices is because a key part of that training is trying to help organisations understand how they can start feeding that out through their organisations, through signage in their organisations, through communications in their newsletters, through emails, and other ways that they continue to make sure that narrative, that change is happening within the organisation is really, really important. And we just launched, in partnership with IFC, a report on workplace responses to family and sexual violence. And we measured the business case. So these findings are significant. So the report just came out this week. And it was researched and written in partnership with IFC and our organisation, the Business Coalition for Women, with support from the Australian and New Zealand governments. And what it found was that if you have internal responses such as policies and procedures, as well as key people within that organisation who are continuing that cultural change and narrative, and external support for people going through these issues, you will see benefits. And so that is really, really encouraging. So we do know that by having policies in place, systems in place, but acting on them through cultural norms and practices as well, you will see change. So this was some of the change. They included less acceptance of family and sexual violence in those organisations. Higher rates of reporting family and sexual violence, so they were able to come out and speak to their workplace about what they were experiencing. Fewer days were lost to the impacts of family and sexual violence. And there was more helpful responses from the community through GESI, PNG Case Management Centre and the Safe House, and the other referral pathways as well. So those figures actually are showing a change pattern. So we do know that you can impact on gender diversity in a workplace if you make sure there is leadership commitment, integrated strategy, and we're changing norms and cultures. And I think that what we've learned in the business community, the public sector, it can absolutely reflect and learn on that process as well. So I suppose I just wanted to maybe end with a few questions that I feel that workplaces can be thinking about. And they are stereotypes and discrimination part of our workplace? How do the leadership styles we value and promote value men or women? And do we exclude or undervalue or fail to credit women's leadership and opinions in our communications and decision making? So we really need to reevaluate, are we as an organisation about creating diversity, or are we maintaining the status quo? Because if we really want commitment through leadership, strategy and norm change, we will reap the benefits as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for that comprehensive presentation. And I hear that the report on the workplace responses to family and sexual violence in PNG is available.
It is. It's available on our website.
On your website,
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's something interesting. All our online viewers, if you're interested to read it, please go to the website for the Business Coalition for Women and access that report. It's unfortunate that we still do not have Mr. Emmanuel Ginis with us, but thank you for those participating virtually. We'll be getting questions now. If anyone here physically would like to ask any questions or any comments on what Yvonne just presented, now is the time. There's one question from one of our online participants, and the question is, which businesses can you say have been very responsive to the GESI policy, and from what your organization has been doing, can you say anything about that with the other organizations you've been supporting and the women? And
yeah, there are many organisations. I mean, I mentioned the Bank of South Pacific before. So they're working, they've got a strategy, they're working on internal policies, and they actively do community work in those areas as well around violence and gender. Steamships, I would say, is also one of those organisations who is working hard to encourage gender diversity. Oil Search is another, ExxonMobil also. So a lot of these companies, you know, are linked to also global companies. And the recognition that they need to encourage gender diversity because it is good for business is well and truly there, entrenched in their leadership. I think the struggle sometimes is when they are trying to ensure that those cultural norms and those organisational norms are also supporting diversity. And I think that's where a lot of our work needs to start focusing around, you know, having those conversations around culture and cultural change as well, and involving men in those conversations as well.
I mean, I agree with you, because for an organization, if you're talking about organizational change or cultural change within an organization, it takes, it doesn't just happen overnight. You know, it has to, there's systems and processes that are already existing, and people are accustomed to what's already there. And I guess it starts with those conversations, and then it happens with, you know, attitudinal change, and then the behavior change starts happening, and people start, you know, seeing the importance and the value of what it means for that change to happen. And it's really heartening to see that, you know, big organizations like BSP and Steamships have actually been, you know, starting on that path towards organizational change, and really institutionalizing that GESI policy and what it means for them. You know what it practically means for that cultural change to happen within those organizations. Thank you. We also have another question for you. So I think one of our online participants is a person living with disability. So they're just asking, was there any attention given to disability as part of the diversity in the policy?
Well, our work specifically focuses around gender diversity, but actually you can't really separate that conversation from disability, and you shouldn't really separate that conversation from disability, because when we talk about diversity, we need to be looking at all diversity. So people living with different abilities, ethnic groups, and also different genders. And so actually that research that I was referring to before about the Harvard Business Review, I mean, it talked about the financial gains that companies had if it was gender diverse, but if you also include disability and ethnic groups, you actually get higher returns on finance and other benefits. And so the way that we need to be encouraging people with disability in the workforce is to make sure that their voices are heard, just the way someone of a gender should be heard. So creating that space where they're involved in decision making, and usually that's in leadership positions. And so that's why we also try and encourage women into leadership positions. And I do believe that we need to have diversity of abilities in leadership positions as well.
Yes, I think that's really important. Having that part of the discussion or conversation around disability, also part of, everything that we're doing, trying to also be mindful or be aware that, there are different types of groups. When we mean diversity, we mean all these groups that we have in society. So thank you, Yvonne, for that. I'm just going to check if we have Emmanuel with us joining in any time soon. No. So the link has always, the link to the report has also been put on the chat box for those viewing in. He is? Okay. So the link to the report that Yvonne was just talking about has also been put online in the chat box for viewers who are participating online. If you would like to read the report, please click on the link and you can access the report. This is the workplace response to family and sexual violence in PNG, measuring the business case. So thank you. We have Emmanuel online with us. Can I just see that he's on the screen so I can ask him to give his presentation on the topic discussed? Is he there? Hi,
Hi,
Emmanuel,
Ms.
can you do a sound check with me? Can you hear me?
Hey. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Are you looking directly into your video, your laptop cam, or your? Yes, please.
Sort of
Face
externally.
front so we can see that you're
Look into
looking.
that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So let me just touch base on
go
what
ahead.
just happened. We did an introduction. Yvonne has given her part of the presentation. So it's timely that you just came in now because we were just going through a few questions that our online participants had for Yvonne. But maybe you can come in now to give your side of the presentation on the GESI policy, if you may. And also, if you have any, if you would like to share some of the feedback on, I understand that there was a review done on the GESI policy last year. So if you have any feedback for our audience and our viewers, then maybe that would be something that you can tie into your presentation as well. Thank you. So over to you now, Mr. Ginis.
Okay. What will I call those who are on the Zoom meeting and those who are at the conference area? My apologies for connecting late. We're having issues at the office with our internet, so I'm using my mobile phone to connect. But anyway, thank you for having a Department of Professional Management on this important forum here. As you've known from our previous engagement, we've sort of driving the National Public Service Gender Equity and Social Inclusion Policy. It has been here for a while, being implemented across various agencies of government. And as you've mentioned, we are currently in policy. So see where we are impacting, within our, having an impact within our organizations, especially bodies or, statutory bodies as well. Basically, in terms of how well these agencies have taken up the work around gender equity and social inclusion. As some of you may already be aware of, the work of GESI on having workplace policies or looking at workplace policies, the settings and what can we do to improve on that. So in the review that we've conducted in the research, in light of the review that we are working on, we've identified that for some time slow, mainly for various reasons. One of it being that it needs more support from the agency level itself, getting people on board to occupy positions or GESI positions that was created for that purpose, and to be driven at the agency level. While saying that, the challenges is even more at the provincial level, in that the accessibility to certain information or communication and key drivers that can support the policy is lacking in some areas, and in some areas needs that are coordinated all stakeholders. That includes non-government actors and most importantly the public servants within those respective agencies. So there was a research done. We have not at the department finalized or endorsed it yet from Secretary's office. But once it is endorsed at the Secretary's office, then we can make it public for everyone to appreciate the findings of the research itself. But that basically is to inform the policy that we are sort of putting together. The main focus now is to strengthen the accountability of the reporting and communications back to government. In the previous arrangement, the agencies, as and when they have activities around that, they report. But we want to strengthen that particular bit of reporting so that we are informed about what agencies are doing and where we can come in to assist them in supporting the implementation of the policy. And as you know, our target is the public service or public servants in particular, basically getting them to be supporters of the agenda of inclusiveness and fairness, so that we can much needed services to diverse groups of people that we are here to serve. It is it's a challenge also, especially when we're having a conversation around gender, basically because of the perception that in a lot of conversations that we have, it is perceived as something to do with women's issues and issues around women only. But we sort of step back to see it as a community issue. It's not just a issue affecting women, but our children, the elderly, and even men. So we open up the conversation so that we paint the picture that GESI or gender is not an issue that only affecting women, but it affects our society in general. So there's still a lot of work to do or to be done. We after the launch, we hope that launch of the revised policy, we hope to communicate it to wider partners, especially to drive it to within the areas of influence also, so that we get that momentum, build that momentum again to get that message out there and address those critical issues that affect our service delivery, and importantly, our workplaces. But if there's any particular question around or your interest in knowing about the research, I can pick on any specific areas that our listeners would want to know of, or the panel or those participants at the workshop venue can would want to know about.
Hello. So, Emmanuel, are you finished with your... Sorry, I could, because we're having technical issues with audio, I think it's your audio on your side, so I could only vaguely understand some of what you were saying, but thank you for your presentation. I hear that from what you just said, from the review that was done, there needs to be more support in terms of the mechanisms around, accountability and monitoring how the policy has been implemented, reporting back to the office, and other gaps that has been identified from the review. So thank you for that. I have a question from one of our provincial viewing sites. I forgot to mention to the both of you that we also have 4 locations that are viewing in this live streaming: Buka, Goroka, Wewak, and Ley. So we have participants viewing and are being supported by our partner organizations on the ground. So they're also viewing this session at the moment. One of their questions was, are there any departments or provinces that are doing very well and that you can say are standing out in terms of implementing the GESI policy? Mr. Ginis.
I mean, the implementation of the policy really depends on the initiatives undertaken by respective priority areas within the policy for agencies to work towards. The context in which it is being taken up really depends on the support that is given at the from the management level. But in terms of agencies standing out, or in terms of the uptake of the policy, I would say West Sepik is doing well in terms of that. The sort of taken this on board, or they have people. We also have Morobe that has come on board. I'm sorry, I'm mentioning the provinces here. We also have national agencies, but I'll just mention the provinces that we are currently working closely with and have seen some significant progress in terms of how they have been taking up the policy and running with it within the respective sectors. So we have East New Britain and West New Britain as well in terms of the PHA, and then so I think that's about the number of provinces that we have been working closely with. The others, like I've said, we do not have GESI managers on board yet. So in terms of implementing the policy, It's quite a challenge to have that drive, get agencies to drive it within the respective agencies. For the national agencies, we have IRC, that's always Department of Justice and Attorney General, the Constitutional Law Reform Commission. We have the correctional services that have come on board, the police, and just recently we're working closely with the agencies with the support of those agencies. These agencies taking on the responsibility for implementing that policy.
Thank you, Mr. Ginis. May I just remind our viewers that Mr. Ginis is from the Department of Personal Management, representing the public sector and speaking on, focusing on the GESI policy, while we have Yvonne Kennedy here from the Business Coalition for Women, speaking on behalf of the private sector. There's a question for you, Yvonne. So one of our viewers, participants from our provincial viewing sites asked if, you were talking about a lot of the big companies that were actually doing something to implement these policies, the GESI policies. So are there any companies in particular where are nationally owned, homegrown Papua New Guinean companies that have actually done something?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yep, so we have TEPNG, who's doing a lot of work in terms of anti-sexual harassment policy. Well, it stands for, it's an IT company. So that's national, that's a national company, that's PNG owned. We have PNG FM, who's been doing a lot of policy work around diversity. So they've got a family and sexual violence policy that they're trying to implement, an anti-sexual harassment policy they're trying to implement. So we have a number of PNG-owned organisations who are trying to do work and good work in the community level. And we're actually getting more SMEs. So coming on board, because I feel that they're seeing the value in their organisations as well, and they're reaping the benefits from having a gender diverse workforce as well.
Thank you for that. We have one question here for Emmanuel. It's from one of our online participants. How are departments going about addressing the challenges that you just described in your presentation, that public servants view GESI or gender as only concerning women? So is the department doing anything about that in addressing that?
Yes, thank you for that. We have programs that are running concurrently to enlighten our public servants about the policy itself and what it intends to achieve. One of these is we have the Public Service Male Advocacy Network. That basically is getting or training and getting men with those agencies to have that conversation within the respective agencies or areas of influence to elaborate on what the issues are, what the challenges are. Not everyone is aware of what those issues, challenges are. Until they have that conversation, they start to talk about those issues, and they get to appreciate how it affects not only women but the men as well, and how those issues affect the organization in terms of the performance of individuals in the workplace. So we have a sensitization and mainstream program. And then the second one is the male advocacy network program in place.
I think we're having visual technical problems with Mr. Ginis, can you hear us?
Yes,
So
yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, your audio isn't that
Sorry, where did
effective, so you're like freezing in between what you're saying, and then it's not coming out really clearly, so we're having a difficult time hearing you. But did you just finish what you say, or would you like to continue?
I'm not sure where you last heard me. I can repeat myself.
For Evonne. Okay, that's okay. So while we're just waiting, we have a couple of questions from our physical participants here. I'll just read out one of them from Toby, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think this is a general question to both our panelists, or is it directed to anyone in? It's a general question. Okay, so are there any counseling services being provided for survivors? Ms. Kennedy, you can answer that first.
Well, yeah, we heavily promote counselling services. The One Talk Counselling Help Line we promote through the business community. But actually, a lot of private sector are asking for private counsellors because they would like counsellors to go on site as well. And so we have given, contact information around people that we know in the community who might be able to support. Other companies have an employment assistance program where they have counsellors from overseas that they can tap into, and it's confidential, and the company picks up the bill for that counselling as well. So absolutely, counselling is one of those things that we see as very, very important for psychological well-being, but also for anyone who might just want to reflect on their circumstances and work through the issue.
Thank you, Yvonne. Mr. Ginis, would you like to answer that question before I move on to the next question? Are there any counseling services provided to survivors? Any that would you know of?
Yes, that's where within the public service, community development, welfare services, refer our cases private or the NGO run counseling services. That is something that is lacking within the public service, which is really needed. So,
Mr. Ginis, sorry, we're having connectivity issues hearing what you said, so I don't think any of us could hear what you just said there, but I'm just going to move on to the next question. Okay, so I think it's for the both of our panelists or our presenters here. How has the policy promoted women's participation in executive positions? And do you have any statistics or any numbers of women who've actually participated and moved up to executive positions that you can share with us?
Yes, so in terms of our work in the private sector, how we try and encourage women's participation is by trying to reduce some of those barriers that impede on women's participation. So absolutely, if you create safe workspaces, you're going to see more women entering the workplace. If you see safer spaces, you're going to see more women promoted into leadership positions as well. And certainly from our membership, so we have been tracking our membership. We do see a lot of women in middle management. In the last 5 years, we've seen an increase in senior executive positions. And at the board level, we still have a small percentage at the board level, but there are more women entering the board level. And how we also try and support that process is through skill development training. So we offer a certificate for and leadership and management training for women. We have a senior executive women's program, and we also have a directorship course. So there are opportunities where women, while they're progressing, if they're getting those opportunities, they can continue getting the skill development in country as well to support them through that process. But for us, it's not about just appointing a woman into a position, because we know that there are lots of women with lots of skills and qualifications and the capacity to do jobs, but they're not given those opportunities. So what we're trying to do is to create a space where those opportunities are presented to everyone equitably. And so when people are applying for those positions, it's on an equal ground and an equal footing. And hopefully women do get more opportunities to apply for those positions and are given those positions based on their talent and qualifications and skills as well.
And not because of the fact that they're women. Yeah. Yep, thank you. Just wanted to add that in. Mr. Ginis, would you like to answer that question? So how has that, I'm going to read the question again. How has the policy promoted women's participation in executive positions? And do you have any examples from the public sector service that you can share with us?
Yes, thank you for that question. Women within the public service, it's, I don't know about other areas, but there's still a struggle within the public service. Even though they have the merit, they have the qualifications, there seems to be the class ceiling that's in existence. However, over the years, through advocating or having that conversation with agencies, we have seen women going into middle to senior management level, but that's only at the national agencies or here at Waigani and Port Moresby. But when you go further or go out into the province, that is not realized yet. There's still a lot of barriers. The barriers are specific to those different provinces. In the areas where the male-dominated or patrilineal societies, you would hardly see any women in leadership or management roles. very low level of the families. However, in terms of the general statistics for women coming into the public service, we observed that it has increased by 9% over the years, from where it was back in 2013 until now. But that figure is also contextualized, whether if it's in the province or at the national agency. It has the, I mean, it's not kind of figures that we would be expecting from the policy point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Ginis. Thank you for sharing that. We have, I think, less than 10 minutes left, 9 minutes actually, before we end the discussion. So I am going to entertain maybe 2 questions, and we will end off here. There's one question from our physical participants here. I think this is the question for Mr. Ginis. With the challenges that you shared in your presentation, is there any thoughts around what plans or strategies your department has in terms of addressing this, and what are the ways forward? Has that discussion happened? And if it
like
has,
I've
then
mentioned,
can you share with us?
All right. Like I've mentioned also, there's a number of factors that affect that we need to address on a case-by-case basis. Whilst we may have a policy that speaks broadly around the issue itself, when you contextualize it, when you go into the actual implementation of it, you will see those challenges in the context of what the organization is mandated for. Like, for example, you will see technical areas such as infrastructure, roads, building, construction. They will have their own challenges. The police or the law and justice have their own challenges. So what we encouraging agencies to do is to identify those challenges that are specific to them, but the policy is talking about. So in that way, we come up with solutions that are specific to that agency, and there's a consensus of adopting or implementing those solutions with the kind of capacity that they have and the leadership that they have, and the whole operation systems and processes that guides the operation strategies. That's why we encourage those people that we can work closely with, and then we address or identify those issues and challenges on a case-by-case basis and work towards adopting certain strategies. Gender, the work of gender, it's a complex problem. We operate on that notion that if we do something, that works for this agency, it might not work for another. So solutions and strategies is the approach that we are taking to implementing the policy within those respective agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Ginis. Let me just, I just like to add something. All these everything that Ms. Kennedy presented on, the impact that has happened over the last few years, seeing women, progress into these executive positions, supporting women in training, and with Mr. Ginis's presentation, these things have actually been supported by the government through the GESI policy that was created in 2013. It wouldn't have been possible for our private sector services to have these things happen without a policy in place, and that has been through the formulation of the policy and all our partners working together hand in hand to implement what was created by our government. So just putting it out there that both the public and the private sector are working together to ensure that this policy is being implemented.
Can I also add to
yes.
that, Gloria? Because, and just touching on what you said, that, we would be more than happy to work with you, Emmanuel, because I think that a lot of our lessons are also transferable, and we've actually have some evidence to show what's working now and some of the gap areas. And people often think that, private sector is different to public sector. In ways it is, but you're still an organisation, you're still an employer. And if I'm not wrong, you're the biggest employer in Papua New Guinea. So, we need to collectively work together to make Papua New Guinea successful. And before you connected, I was talking about, some of the key criteria to, making it successful. And that is leadership commitment. And we really need to see leadership commitment in government from the different levels within government, and not just lip service. We actually need to see it through strategy, and we're thankful that you do have the GESI strategy. And I think that report that you were talking about, the research, is your baseline, it's your benchmark to say where you are at now. And if we have targets in the strategy, we can reflect on that research and say how far have we come, and what are we achieving. And I think that together, both the public and private sector could share our learnings, and we could actually make more success and more impact through that as well.
Thank you, Yvonne, for that. Appreciate it. We're going to have one more question, and we will end our session. This question is from, I'm monitoring questions also on my phone, so that's why you can see me looking down into my phone. Okay. This is for Mr. Ginis. I think our participants in lay would like to know who our GESI officer is in lay. So if you can just put it out there, if you know of the officer, GESI officer in lay.
Yes. Within the provincial administration, yes.
Would you know the person, the name of the person, so our online participants can? No. Not at the moment. That's okay. That's okay.
The name, but I can give the contact on the panel here.
Okay, Mr. Ginis will share the contact with yes, with our GESI officer and lay after, and I will share it after this discussion. So there's one more question. In Isipik province, Kalan Services is also zooming in. And their question is, Isipik persons living with disabilities are an organization working with people living with disabilities. These two groups have not accessed much funding from the government. Staff from Kalan Services would like to know if there is a certain percentage of funding allocated for people living with disabilities to advocate and do its program. I think that question is for you, Mr. Ginis.
Yes, let me firstly commend the great work that the Kalan Services are doing people living with persons living with disability. I think the first community development, they have a special section that deals with all the issues around that. Funding aspect of it, and getting the support from the government that comes through the Department for Community Development. But in terms of operationalizing the functions, there are opportunities there that can be tapped into. Like, for instance, working with the provincial health authorities, even the provincial governments. That is why it is important that we have GESI officers in those entities, so that wherever the opportunity to support programs like the current services that are there, then that information or that request can be facilitated through the administrative functions that are already on the ground in the respective provinces. So that whatever that is support that is needed there can be known, and the support can be given. Like I said, in terms of the whole of government coordination, we are here to connect such services to localities where the need is, and likewise in terms of funding support as well. We try to make that conversation with those respective agencies that are on the ground, who can provide some sort of support to the services that you are providing. So it is an area that community development is taking lead in. We are part of the disability board, or the committee that is established here to talk about such funding issues. Like I said, the community development is the one that is taking lead in that. But with some of these issues can be taken on board and discussed on further, or in another forum specifically for that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ginis. Thank you for that. I can see our time is up, and we've just gone over 3 minutes. So I'm going to have to end our session this afternoon. I would like to, on behalf of Pacific Women, I'd like to thank Evonne for taking time out and coming, and for Mr. Ginis to, I know both of you are very busy, but I'm very thankful that you had time to come and share with us today and be part of this event. So thank you very much. Thank you to our sign interpreter too, for our online participants and physical participants who are participating with us. Thank you for your time as well. And I hope you all have a very good afternoon. Bye from us here now.
Thanks, Gloria.